Good evening, everyone. This is Chair Miller, and I'd like to formally call the meeting to order. Welcome to City staff, Transportation Commissioners, and the public to the March 20th, 2025 Transportation Commission meeting. Meetings are held in person, televised on Cox Cable Channel 11, and streamed online on scottsdaleaz.gov for the public to listen and view the meeting in progress. I'd like to ask for a roll call to begin this evening's meeting.
Chair Miller.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Merman.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Crofstyle.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Davis is absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Spoken comment is being accepted for agendized and non-agendized items. The request to speak forms must be submitted no later than 90 minutes before the start of this meeting. Have we received any requests for spoken comments?
Chair Miller, members of the commission, no, we have received no request to speak forms. Thank you.
Thank you. Written comments are being accepted for agendized and non-agendized items and should be submitted electronically at least 90 minutes before the start of this meeting. These comments are also emailed to the Transportation Commission and posted online. Have we received any written comments?
Chair Miller, members of the commission, we have not received any written comments either. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that takes us to the first item on the agenda, the approval of the meeting minutes of February 20th, 2025. Do we have a motion or?
Motion to adopt the meeting minutes for, what was the date?
Thank you, Commissioner Crofstyle.
Second.
Commissioner Wilcoxon seconds. Are there any comments on the meeting minutes? I have several comments on the meeting minutes.
Okay, we will do a roll call here to approve. Chair Miller.
No, I have some comments.
Oh.
Okay, sorry. I just lost it. On page 3 of the minutes, there appears to be some confusion over, or at least in my mind, confusion over the area that we were talking about here. It talks about, it was undetermined if speed occurring past 82nd Street to Hayden, as opposed to 82nd Street past Hayden. And in the next paragraph, it says the entire half mile is Hayden to, it says 82nd to Granite Reef is a half mile, but a half mile is actually Hayden to Granite Reef. So I think we just need to clarify.
Chair Miller, members of the commission, we can make that clarification and edit in there.
Okay. My second comment is that on page 5, particularly at the beginning, it is full of alphabet soup, lots of acronyms that are not defined up there. DSPM, RRFBs, HAWKs, we pretty much know those, but I would prefer to have those referenced for the public who may be reading these.
Chair Miller, we can also make sure that we're completely spelling those out and then use the abbreviations after each. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 more comments then. Commissioner Davis had pointed this one out on item number 5 on page 7 in the paragraph right before the motion. Talks about LAPs are in the JAS system, and he believes, and he's probably correct, that it's the GIS system.
That is correct. We'll make that change.
And finally, just a comment on the minutes. Under item 4, we have in the minutes that they noted the discussion that at this meeting we'll talk about initial goals and policies in the draft for the safety plan. Just want to note, as staff has mentioned to me, that that was not ready for this meeting and will be coming to us at a later meeting. Is that correct, Domi?
Yes, Chair Miller, thank you. That will be coming in the May Transportation Commission meeting now.
Thank you. And if there's no other comments, I guess I will take a motion to approve with those changes.
Motion to adopt the minutes from February 20th, 2025 with the changes.
And I second the motion.
Thank you. We take a vote?
Chair Miller.
Approved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Merman.
Approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Pankowitz.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Crofttile.
Yes.
Thank you. And Commissioner Cardella.
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes are approved as amended.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is Prop 479 Arterial Life Cycle Program. Nathan Dome will give us the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Miller, members of the Transportation Commission. Yes, last time we talked about the Arterial Life Cycle Program was April of last year. So seeing as it's March of 2024, it seems like we'll start doing this on a yearly cycle, but also on the previous election cycle, Prop 479 passed for the regional sales tax to be continued for the next 20 years. And as part of that, we had a series of arterial projects that will get funded by the region. So I wanted to give a overview of what those projects were again, as well as what we do at the local level to support and facilitate those. So Prop 479 is now continuing that tax from 2026 to 2046. The image is showing Jomax east, looking east from Scottsdale Road. This will be one of the roads that is on the list, but to just show from a street angle what is kind of existing, and then if you could imagine just expanding it, adding curb gutter, medians, all the features that will bring roadways up to current standards as well as to their ultimate configuration. So one of the key ones is Jomax going from Scottsdale to Pima. So background again about the Arterial Life Cycle Program. It's a defined list of arterial projects to be funded through Prop 400 will be now updated to say through Prop 479 through December of 2045. It's a regional sales tax of 0.5% to Maricopa County to fund 70% of the ALCP projects. So it's a 20-year tax to go and that is maintained, and the funding is maintained by Maricopa County. On the local level, the cities manage the projects and receive the 70% reimbursement. What we need to do is come up with our 30% local match to use those 70% funds. So we're required to find 30% of the funding as well as to manage the projects all the way to finishing. So city staff is required to find the consultants for design, find the contractors for construction, and see it all the way to the end. MAG will reimburse us for their portion of that. The projects can include, at least a local level, based on our own design standards, bike lanes, sidewalks, roundabouts, bike paths, trails, anything that supports our local policies. So you can see Redfield here being a roundabout installed at 2023. That was with ALCP funding, something that the city asked for at that time. The goal of the ALCP is to widen existing roads to match future projected capacity needs, improve intersections, mostly also to construct new arterial segments, but overall bring the segments to current standards as well as their ultimate configuration based on the needs of the surrounding area. They are roads of significant regional significance. So we're talking about our arterials that connect not just across our entire city, but across different cities, linking that arterial network together so that when you cross multiple jurisdictions, you can feel a level of consistency among your arterial roadways. I guess that would be what MAG is getting out of the deal, that across all the region, we are feeling some level of reliability on our arterial network. Prop 479 is going to start in January of 26 and continue for 20 years. So we will end the funding cycle for Prop 400 December of 25 and pick right back up with January of 26. The importance of this is the projects that we have remaining in Prop 400, they have their dedicated funding source that was collected up to 25, and then this new batch of projects will have their dedicated funding source. And from my understanding from MAG is those will be very separate buckets of funding on their level. For us, when it comes to how we do our local match, the 30% is with our 0.1% sales tax that was passed in 2019. That is dedicated to just the ALCP match for now, and that will be able to be used for both Prop 400 projects as well as Prop 479 projects. The new list of projects with Prop 479 is shown on the screen. Prop 400 projects were primarily focused on the north-south routes. So Scottsdale and Pima were the primary recipients of that funding, as well as some of the interchanges on the 101 and some of Shea. This one is looking a lot more at the east-west movements, particularly in the north. So we're looking at going from top to bottom of the map, not necessarily the graphic, or I can go with the graphic. So 56th, the chart. So 56th Street, just to the west of the city, right between Jomex and Dynamite, is one of the projects that will be a new roadway. It's kind of a half street right now. That would be a full reconstruction, as well as a full new roadway and a new arterial. 92nd and 94th will get a reconfiguration, a reconstruction of itself. It's right down into the middle of the city. Dynamite from 56th to Pima would get a widening, so crossing Scottsdale Road, going from 56th all the way over to Pima. So kind of connecting into what we're just now doing on Prop 400. Happy Valley, we just completed Happy Valley just west, just east of Pima. Now we're going to the west all the way over to Scottsdale Road. Hayden Road from McKellips to Indian School, that's going to get a reconstruction as well. If anybody drives that road, they know that it's pretty out of date. So getting a reconstruction of that area would be pretty helpful, including the non-motorized activities along that corridor. Jomax 56th to 95th, another widening project I showed in the previous slide. Legacy Boulevard will be getting a new bridge. Lone Mountain will be widening. So I guess going back to the Legacy, it's been half constructed by DC Ranch. So the other half, the more southern part, will be constructed by us through this program to complete that segment. It cuts in and goes over one bridge. We'll connect that second bridge and add the 4 lanes back to that section. Lone Mountain will get a widening. So that will be the completion of all of those, and then Pinnacle Peak. So pretty substantially all of the east-west arterial movements in the northern part of the city. Miller will get its connection underneath the already constructed underpass under the Loop 101. During Prop 400, we completed the cutout, as it were, of the ADOT facility, the Loop 101. Now it would be putting the roadway in with developer help in that area to complete that roadway. Mountain View would be a reconstruction along Mountain View from 92nd to 96th. There's been some resident concerns about a possible widening there. It would be just a reconstruction at best for there. Pinnacle Peak, Scottsdale Road to Pima would be another roadway widening up north to its ultimate configuration. Scottsdale from Highland to Frank Lloyd Wright would be one of the biggest ones on this list, and as you can see on the map, it's a very long stretch. That's going to be a pretty detailed reconstruction of key parts along that corridor. We have various, I wouldn't say issues, but I guess concerns along that corridor. We'd look to just make a full improvement of anything that was not to our standards along that corridor. Scottsdale Road, McKellips to Roosevelt is just a small stretch there for a reconstruction. Then Scottsdale from Loop 101 to Jomax. This has been a longstanding effort or interest, including in Prop 400. So that would finally get done along this series of projects. And then finally, Via Linda from 90th Street to Frank Lloyd Wright being another reconstruct. So about $320 million worth of improvements here, both from us and the region, for all of these roadways throughout our city over the next 20 years. We're currently working with MAG on phasing these. We have a phasing plan right now, but we're modifying or looking to possibly modify if we see any need to, and then coordinate with them about how we go about it. How it works is we will have 4 phases for each of these projects, comprising about 4 or 5 projects in each of the phases. So phase 1 will come in and we'll get those funding while phase 2, 3, and 4 are weighted. That's exactly how Prop 400 worked. So a lot of the projects we talk about now were established as projects in 2004. And some people ask, why did it take so long? It's just because those projects were phased in phase 5. So they were just on hold until phase 5 came around while we were doing the other projects of Prop 400. So certainly a lot of time and effort made to talk to MAG and coordinate which ones should be going and which ones are of most need and need to come in the fastest. So this has been a longstanding effort by MAG to fund these arterial improvements as well as the highway improvements in the valley, starting back from 1985 with Prop 300 all the way up till 2045 will be a substantial amount of funding and years of improvements through the region's network. Going back to adding both Prop 400 and Prop 479, you'll see on the map the overall improvements that have happened or going to happen. So once we get to 2046, all of these projects will have been completed and finished, showing a pretty comprehensive network of our arterials being improved upon over these 40 years. So right now we have 67, probably a little bit more just now as November hit and we finished 3 ALCP projects of the Prop 400 projects. Check this. Prop 400 has 67% of projects with capacity improvements, so meaning that we widened lanes in those projects. The other ones had just modifications for safety or building them out to have active transportation and complete for stormwater improvements. Prop 479 is going to have 66% of the projects with capacity improvements. The other ones, again, having safety or accessibility improvements along them. So going on to the 1% sales tax. So the region in 1985 passed Prop 300, showing a 0.5% sales tax that went all the way to 2025. We extended that, like I said, going from 26 to December of 25 with another 0.5% sales tax for Prop 400. That was to do freeway, arterial streets, and transportation system, and the transit system. Then they just passed this one. There's another 0.5% sales tax to do the exact same improvements. So freeway system, arterial system, and transit system all getting improved. When we look for our local match, we're looking to in 2019, when we went to go get our local match with a 1% sales tax, we showed some information about what kind of how high our sales tax was in comparison to the rest of the valley. And what was shown was that we are at the close to the bottom of the list of the percent of sales tax that we have. And this is showing the 2025 numbers and the sales tax that we have, and it's even lower now to where we're at the bottom, just above Chandler for our sales tax. Our tourism dollars brings in a significant amount, so we are able to facilitate these improvements while still maintaining a pretty low sales tax. So going into a little bit of a description of the sales tax that we work with in the city. In 1989, we passed the 2% sales tax. This is a permanent tax. This is basically the bedrock or the foundation of how we do transportation improvements, both on the operating side, but also on the capital side. So this funds all of our operating efforts, but any of our primarily locally funded projects as well as our federal projects, we use this to support that. So if we take, for example, the Chaparral Underpass, a federally funded project, we used 2% sales tax for that local match. And we'll use the 2% sales tax on many of the local matches for federal projects, as well as funding 100% of our our local needs. The 1% sales tax passed in January of 2019. It expires in December of 29, and it is for that 30% match of ALCP projects, focused primarily on the arterial streets. So that is a dedicated source just for this in order to facilitate that local match. It's been, back at that time, we were finding it concerning that we weren't going to be able to fund our local match, which means we would have had to give up the 70% match that MAG was bringing to us. The transportation director and the staff at that time asked to move forward this tax. It got passed, and it's been a very important necessity in accomplishing the projects that have happened since 2019. You can see on the map that with that tax, we have finished the Rain Tree project over in the air park. We have finished the PIMA project between Pinnacle Peak, Happy Valley, as well as Happy Valley. We finished the Hayden Miller Bridge that's up there between Pinnacle Peak and Happy Valley. We've completed or started the Loop 101 interchange improvements, and then several other of the ones, but it's been a pretty significant improvement to us finishing off these projects. And so the arterial life cycle next year for the Prop 479, for the request from the region, so it's $320 million in total. The local contribution that we would need to come up with in order to get the 70% would have been $96 million of that $320 million. So going forward in the next 20 years, that local contribution will be $96 million. So as I said before, we're looking to phase the ALCP projects. That is looking for proper spacing of the projects. So as we're working with MAG, I said the importance of the projects. One of those important factors is making sure that we don't overload one side of the network with too much construction. We want to space them out as evenly as possible. So let's say we don't do Dynamite and Jomex at the same time. That would obviously be a need for Jomex to be operating while Dynamite is under construction. That will minimize disruption. We're looking for adequate project funding through the sales tax, coordination with the other infrastructure. So every time we do one of these major roadway projects, we really want to make sure that we work with the other departments as well as our own internal staff to facilitate that we're doing things with less disruption to the residents. So an example, when we, for Jomex, from Scottsdale, Jomex to Dixoletta, we were working with the water department so that their water improvements would happen before we did the roadway work, so they wouldn't have to come and dig up the project, dig up our roadway to put in their pipe and add more construction, more barricades for a longer length of time. Same with Thomas as well as 68th Street sidewalk. We're always working with our stormwater or water department to make sure that they will put in their infrastructure before we go and top it off with a roadway improvement. We're also looking for ease of implementation, pre-project assessment, and strong resident feedback. So looking at all of these different steps before we start implementing it in. We have a moment here going up until January 26th to make sure that we phase this about as well as we can for both the residents as well as things that we need to look at in order to get the projects done. We know that a strong need for the northern arterial projects is going to be stormwater improvements, reducing the wet crossings, bringing it up, putting culverts in. That's going to come with significant stormwater analysis. So we maybe time some of the projects, Jomex being one of the prime examples with the Rawhead Wash going right through there, that we time that in a way that it gets phased for the transportation improvements after we've already conducted the stormwater analysis, to kind of have that done before we start working too closely with the transportation aspects. And so with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions? Question?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman. And Nathan, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I just had a couple of questions, and it looks like a lot of work headed and a lot of good work going your way. When you said, and I think I got this, you said that we have until January 26, or January of next year, basically, to come up with a phasing plan. Do we pretty much stick to the phasing plan? Like for Props 300 and 400, I'm assuming it was a similar process, and whatever was in the original phasing plan, did that kind of proceed along the lines, or?
We would like to make a good phasing plan that we can stick to, but we have flexibility in that.
Okay.
We can make adjustments through the course of time. MAG's very receptive to working with us on our needs to do these projects. So if we need to phase something out or move it back, there's project change requests that we can make through the course of time. It'll just go through the MAG committees and get approval, and we can move it to accommodate that need. So we want to make a phasing plan that's good, but we can make changes if we need to.
Okay, but it sounds like the plan itself and any adjustments are entirely in the control of the city of Scottsdale.
It is, yes.
Okay, that's good to hear. And then on the project, I think it might have been number 13 on that map, the one on Scottsdale Road from Highland to Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh, yeah, number 12.
You said that was going to be reconstructing in different parts of it. Are you just focusing on the arterial intersections there, or what are you doing?
So there's been various improvements done along that corridor. I think we still have requests and funding that have asked for that area. It's a large portion of the central of the city. So when we start this, I think we want to start an evaluation of what we have already done and then what needs to be done to bring it up to a consistency. So when I mean spot improvements is just looking at what we've done over the course of time since we've asked for this in 2016 and what is left to be done. So if it kind of gets sectioned off into several locations, we would be doing it that way. We did the similar thing on Shea for Prop 400, where it wasn't a complete reconstruction of Shea, it was several key intersections. So I guess we would do a preliminary analysis of what needs to be done, and it might get sectioned off into different projects, and then also be in certain locations that need those improvements. I guess this is a good part to note. In Prop 400, we started with 13 projects. It got sliced up into about 30 some projects, and that's just for ease of doing the projects. When we look at particularly a stretch like Scottsdale Road from Highland to Frank Lloyd Wright, it's a pretty long stretch. So what we did in Prop 400 was on some of those long stretches, we did cut them off into 4 or 5 different projects, and that seemed to work for us. So that could be a potential too, where we take it and we'll take, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright to Thunderbird, Thunderbird to Shea, Shea down to McCormick Parkway, and McCormick Parkway down to Highland. I just threw those roads out as potential, but just as an example of what we've done in the past. So that could be a chance for us to do that too.
Okay, all right, thank you. So it is similar, I could turn to the Shea project as a similar
It could be just
kind of thought.
It could be just spot intersections,
Yeah.
or it could be different segments and full reconstructions, just
Okay.
what's needed for the roadway.
All right, thank you, good job.
Thank you.
Commissioner Marmon?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A good presentation, Nathan, thank you. On Thompson P. Parkway, that second bridge, it's not in the list.
Yes, that's
further
a
down?
bond. That's a bond project right now. We're under design, so we are going to put that in sooner than the legacy one.
Okay. How do grants fit into all this? For the county's 30%, the city's 30%?
Don't believe we've used grants to match our 30%. I don't know of any grants that we can apply for that would work for that. We can look into that. The closest example I have for us kind of working the funding in a way that we don't just use local sales tax for our 30% is the PIMA from Via Linda to McDowell. That the SRPMIC went and got a federal grant for the majority of that work, so it kind of shifted all the funding down where the regional funding kind of became the local match to the federal grant, and then our local match to that became 30% of the design. If I could bring up my slides for council real quick, you could see that the breakdown. But that kind of shifted everything down to where the local match of that project was the regional ALCP tax funding. So we've done some things to kind of shift money around and find ways to use different buckets, but that's a special situation where they went and got $50 million of a particular grant that is for Native American communities. So that really helped us out by being good neighbors with them. Otherwise, I'm thinking about a grant that could work with that, and maybe if we applied for a grant that was for an arterial improvement, saying that we had a regional portion to that, we could get the funding that way. So it's possible, and we can look into looking for a federal grant that could supply us with a 30% match.
Thank you.
But that would be a spot-by-spot situation, and it wouldn't be a consistent funding source for us on all these projects. We'd have to do it by case by the particular roadways.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner Kafta.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Just from previous experience, I'm kind of curious for Prop 300 and 400. I remember when this was passed, there was the expected income that was going to be brought in, and at one point we had a recession in there, and so I imagine the projections didn't meet reality for some of them, and I'm just curious how we handled in the past, and if the projected money that's going to come from this doesn't meet this or exceeds it, or if we have a boom in the next 20 years or a recession in the next 20 years, what have we done in the past, or what would we do going forward if MAG isn't able to provide the expected monies?
Yes, I can't speak to what happened during the recession. Obviously, Prop 400 crossed the recession timeframe. I can say that they are constantly looking at their cash flows of their tax as well as us, and right now we've gone over the past 4 years in a pretty historic inflation boom, a large amount of inflation to our construction costs, and they've looked to accommodate those cost increases. I know that doesn't directly answer your question in terms of whether the tax goes up or down, but they do work with us on a regular basis on what the projected budget for those projects are and what revenue they have for that. So when it came to the inflation that's happened the last 4 years, we have worked to supplement maybe more with the local percent tax or with moving the region around. So there's always the possibility of canceling projects, rescoping projects. I wouldn't like to say canceling too much, but if it warrants it, not just based on funding, but based on that the need is no longer there, you can move the money between different projects and make sure that you can fund them. So rescoping of projects as well as canceling them.
Thank you for answering my actual question rather than the words I used, because I was curious about the funding, and so
Thanks.
For number 5, on Hayden Road, we just kind of resurfaced it, and so when you say reconstruct, I'm kind of curious what that would actually involve on there. And
that would be either curb modifications, maybe new medians. We're talking if there's any stormwater improvements that need to happen, as well as possible new sidewalks. I know that we need probably all and some of that in that area. Right now in that area, our lanes are more narrow than our standard, so we would probably bump out the curbs a little bit, get to our 11-foot lanes as a standard, see if there's any adjustments to the bike lanes as well. So we're in a very tight space there, so when we're talking reconstruction, we're talking about actually the configuration of the road more than just the surface treatment. We'd obviously come with a new surface treatment as well, but the timing of that project would be most likely the tailor end of the Prop 479, or at least in a way that we wouldn't have just paved the road and then gone and just repaved it again. So, you know, lifespan of pavement is 20, 25 years. So within the time frame of the ALCP, we'll need a new pavement treatment on Hayden anyway.
So these aren't in kind of the, I know you said you haven't done the stages yet, but these aren't in the like proposed order.
These are not in the proposed order, they're alphabetical right now.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, just on that one there, just from personal experience on Hayden, there's no bike lanes on there, and basically the road just goes straight up to the sidewalk in that section. So even just that, like, just a small like 2-foot buffer or something, just from personal experience with driving and people right next to there, it's not, yeah. So I'd like to see that. The other question I have is for number 3, as our most expensive item on there, it's widening the roadway. It's you know, significantly shorter than you know, the second most on Scottsdale, and I'm just wondering, is it from the experience at the for the other roadway we're doing at Scottsdale and Dynamite, I know a lot of the cost there was having to acquire land. Is that similar reason why that number 3 is so much more expensive than just about anything else on the list there?
It could certainly be right away. It would also be widening that roadway out. It would be the stormwater improvements that are happening along that roadway. It's going to be the largest east-west roadway up there, so all those factors are coming into that estimate. As I'm going to present in the next presentation, we want to do a preliminary design as well as a new cost estimate on all of these to look for those key features, which is right-of-way, drainage, so making them dry crossings, as well as the inflation factor that we've been dealing with. We want to make sure that we look at these estimates and put some design work on the ground before we start coming out with new estimates. These are what we put in. This is what we asked for. We did some design on that. We did some scoping of it. I'd like to see what are the right-of-way needs on these projects to move forward with.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Cardella.
Thank you. Maybe I missed it, but what determines the overall total that the city can get? Is it just a matter of us saying this is what we can pitch in for 30% and the county has to match that with 70, or is there some type of cap?
So the list that we gave to MAG was longer than this, and they cut us off at a certain point. Are you familiar with what the cutoff was, Susan?
Chair Miller, Commissioner Cardella, thank you for the question. I'm not familiar. I know this fed into the regional transportation plan, so it may stay in their plan, that full list, I'm not sure, but I don't know. I think they try to balance things throughout the region so that everything's not too heavy in one community and not the others, since everyone's paying into that regional sales tax. But we can find out.
Yeah.
That answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The thing that they returned back to us, there was a calculation that they had made about the necessity and importance of those projects. So there was a factor they put in, including the distribution amongst all the regional jurisdictions, but about every time MAG looks at a federal grant or this regional stuff, they do a calculation of bang for the buck, basically, of like what we're asking for and what the improvement's going to be, and that. So there was a threshold there for that calculation. I do remember now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and take a sip of water and get ready for the next presentation. The feasibility study and conceptual designs for capital projects.
Thank you. So, as we start the CIP process, it's a yearly occurrence for us to put in our list of proposed projects into our CIP, including phasing into our ALCP stuff. So it's a year-round effort by most of our traffic planning, as well as traffic engineering and transportation planning staff, to evaluate requests, as well as look at safety needs and concerns along the roadway, to put into a list that we send over to budget to prioritize what will get funded over the year. What the department's due date is in October. Budget gets approved in the next couple months, and it hits the next fiscal year in July. So we have quite a long gap between when we send our final list of projects and when it finally hits the book and hits into the budget. So over the course of now, we start hearing requests and putting it into a list of projects and scoping it out and getting preliminary estimates on what those projects would cost, so that we can, like we just talked about with MAG, having a cutoff, where we have a cutoff of what we can fund with our 2% sales tax, our 0.2% sales tax. So so this is in our transportation action plan to state that finite resources available to meet current and future transportation needs. So we get a lot of requests, and the list that we come up with is 30 to 40 to 50 projects deep, and we don't get all the way down that list. So prioritizing it is very important to make sure that we're doing that appropriately. So here's several of the factors that go into how a project gets put in, as well as how it gets prioritized. Several of the reasons why it would get prioritized higher than others would be the safety or regulatory compliant requirements. So if we're matching ADA, that's a very important thing. The second most important one is the condition or maintenance of existing assets. One of the projects, at least one of the proposed projects right now that is above the funding line, is the 64th Canal Wall. It is in a state of repair that could really use the improvements along it before it deteriorates further and becomes an emergency need. So seeing those conditions of those assets and being able to go and respond to them before they become a major concern is one of the major reasons why something would be prioritized. Citizen input is a key reason as to both why it's on the list in the first place, as well as how it can go and shoot up the list. Expected usage levels is another one of those key things. Another one on the list right now that's currently above the funding line is the McCormick Parkway multi-use path on the south side. And we know that the expected usage based on current patterns would be high based on people crossing before they even get to the light. Regional connection to regional networks is very important. New development, so if a new development is coming in with in lieu fees, and we can utilize those fees that we get from a new development and put in an asset that we need, we'll be happy to see that go up. That also comes with a conversation about the regional funding as well as federal funding. So if we're able to use more federal and regional funding, that's a reason why a project would go up. Sam Taylor over at the table right now, he applied for an HSIP grant for Camelback and Goldwater. That was approved, and that's now on the proposed projects for this fiscal year coming up in July. That's because the majority of the project would be funded by the federal grant, where we only have to bring in a small portion. That's a really useful tool to use, and a reason why it would also be brought up in the list. As well as, so one of the things that was added for the Transportation Action Plan was expansion of non-auto options. So one of the factors that we wanted to also start looking at, they weren't necessarily getting funded to the same level as an on-street network. So the TAP looked to add non-auto options as a factor into looking at why things would be funded. So I just showed this, and so I can show it again to say here are the two funding sources that we're working off of, the 2% sales tax and the 1% sales tax. What I'll say differently about this as opposed to the previous presentation I just gave is that when we're doing our CIP projects and our prioritizations, we have our own dedicated funding sources, whereas other people are scrapping it out in the general fund, having their projects be competing against, say, Parks is competing against police or any of the other departments are looking to, IT is competing against police too. So two very different types of projects are being evaluated and seeing how their effectiveness is. We don't have to worry about that. We have our own dedicated source. So transportation projects are being compared to other transportation projects. It makes it very helpful for us to just know we have our dedicated source. We know how much capital funding will happen in the fiscal year, and so we can just see which transportation projects can move up. The 1% sales tax is, as I just stated, it doesn't have that same level of prioritization. It's used only for the ALCP match, so it's going to be just funding its ALCP match and doing its own thing. Currently, we have in the CIP, 41% of our projects are locally funded, or of all of our projects, our funding is 41% local funds, 26% federal grants, and 33% regional funds. So I think we're doing a pretty good job of making sure that the majority of our funding is coming from outside sources, and we're getting more projects done and expanding the network further because we're going for these federal grants and we're using these regional funds to improve our network. Going back to how we progress through this budget cycle is about November. This is the dates from last year, so they vary, but they're generally the same. Around November, the budget kickoff happens, which means we're looking to have our stuff in before that. Then we have the open database for the operating, sorry. So then around the fall, we have our open database where we put in our information. Starting in December, budget starts reviewing those requests. It starts going through the various committees starting in the spring. The 5-year plans are finalized around right now, and then they start going for adoption coming in March. It's released and the presented proposed budget comes around April. Tentative adoption is May, and then the final adoption is in June to then hit the fiscal year in July 1st. One thing that helps us fill out that list is the TAP implementation section. So we have a list of all of the running projects that we need to run with. So along with resident requests, regional projects, and safety improvements, that TAP implementation section has all the list of projects going over for the next 20 years that need to be finished and is our guiding source for projects that we need to accomplish. When we used to do, how we do estimates now and how we are kind of working on our estimates, it's created over months between that time frame that I was talking about now until October, to put in a scope and the proposed estimate. This is done before the design starts, and we don't necessarily have the understanding of what's happening currently on the roadway network. We don't know what the right-of-way concerns are. We don't know what the stormwater concerns are or the utility concerns are. This seemed to impact us when it comes to how we've estimated projects, and especially in the last couple years when inflation has gone so high. So before we've done any design, we don't know what right-of-way acquisitions are needed, utility relocations, slopes and grades. stormwater needs, geotech issues, pavement assessments, and final design costs. All of this has come to us in the last 4 years in certain projects. One of the key examples is the 77th Emergency Access Project. This is a important project. We got federal funding before design was done. That funding was for a construction of a street that would go right where you see that project area. So putting a street back there that would connect over to Hayden and to 77th and give that secondary access. The issue that's being addressed here is in that red box is the only way into the community. When it floods, as you can see, it's in the big flood area for the uneven wash. They are blocked out of their houses, and emergency vehicles cannot get in there. They've been requesting this, and we definitely need to facilitate a secondary access point. The federal funding was requested in order to put in that roadway. As we started doing preliminary designs, we realized that a roadway would not fit in that area. So we were asked by Capital Project Management to cancel the project and go for additional funding. We looked at alternatives that could facilitate that emergency access as well as keep the funding. We came up with an option that we would do a multi-use path wider than our normal multi-use paths and graded for vehicles that would allow for when a flooding event is occurring, we could open that up for vehicle movement but be closed for the rest of the years so that it could go along with our multi-use path options in this area, but also to be used for that emergency access. If we had, when we went for the federal funding, we realized that we did not have enough funding to do the roadway project and it didn't fit in the first place. If we could have done preliminary design before going forward with the federal funding, we would have been able to know that and known to go for the appropriate amount of funding that would have been for both the amount of funding that we needed and the appropriate design that was needed. We put an additional $1 million of local sales tax into this project to accommodate this need over the federal grant. And then the Cap Canal project is another one where we didn't know the sloping situation that was happening on the project. It slopes towards the canal. As you go out there and you look at it, it's very flat. It seems appropriate, but without preliminary designs, we didn't know that. Once we started getting design work done, we found that the slopes were going to need to be adjusted in order to put the multi-use path in. So these are the kind of situations that are happening that during our current process for putting a project into the CIP, we will come up with these obstacles to the project that weren't necessarily found out when we were doing initial scoping of the projects. As well as inflation has come up several times when it comes to when we move forward with a project. Over the last 4 years, we've seen a substantial amount of inflation on all of the stuff that goes into our roadway projects. Seeing that all these factors are coming in, that earthwork is up 230% in the region, as well as asphalt 105%, concrete pavement 153%, drainage 75%, structural concrete 126%, all compounding to double our costs on several of our major roadway projects. So we're looking at an effort to do a feasibility and preliminary design effort that we fit into our current CIP request timeline, so we can get some preliminary designs into action before we go for a final estimate request with council. That would be, so feasibility studies are first, so we did add an increase to the operating budget so that we could go out to some of our on-calls, and some of those projects that are in the implementation section, we want to figure out how feasible they are for us to do, so we can make kind of is this possible, or are there fatal flaws on that project that won't allow it to go forward? So trying to look at alternatives as well as the possibility of putting that project together and a preliminary, a more accurate estimate on how much it's going to cost for us to do that. So that would be even before we try and adopt it into the CIP, working out through our operating budget, through our other services funding to put some design on paper and get an estimate based on, like we saw before, whether there's obstacles in the existing conditions that would limit our ability to provide that need in the future. And then we'd also have a document in place that allows us to show and reference back in several situations in the community. We get the same request multiple years over the span of time, where the same request is coming in and again. It's important for us to have some documentation on why that isn't moving forward, and what are the problems associated with moving that improvement forward, so that we can relay that back to both council and the residents that we would like to help, and we understand your need, but here's the problem. So anything can be moved forward, right? It's just a matter of how much funding is it going to take and what are the obstacles in our way to move it forward. Having a documentation that relays that would be helpful in making sure that we relay that information over. That's what that would allow us to do. So, as I said just now, answering the reoccurring requests from residents, projects with preliminary design alternatives that can stay on file for use, and more information to council when determining approval of projects. So they've been asking for more information. We're more than willing and wanting to give it to them in forms of actual design and an estimate based on the obstacles that are in the roadways. Conceptual designs would be somewhat different in terms of we get requests that are just going to go into the CIP for various reasons. We only have a certain amount of money for feasibility studies, so if a CIP request is going to go forward, we'd like to, when we get our preliminary scoping and estimate, and we've done this in this request for this fiscal year, and we move it forward, that we are only going to put in the CIP the funding for the design, not the construction yet, and then work towards getting 15% designs to understand what the right-of-way, what the stormwater needs are, what the utility coordination is, what are the obstacles on that project, and then putting an estimate after we've done design work, after we've found those obstacles, so we can get a better estimate. This is also going to allow City Council to have a second approval for that project. So, as I said, we work from the beginning of the calendar year to about October doing estimates and scoping of projects. We will do that with actual design work and design money on something that has been approved, and hopefully work towards we can get 15% designs and a new estimate that we would put into the approval process the upcoming October. That would allow for us to move all the funding towards both construction into the project, and then have council allowed to basically have two approvals so they can see the need of the project, and then the next time coming up see the true, or as close to the true cost of the project as possible, understanding that we only have a certain amount of design work done at 15%. You know, definitely more things come up as we go to 60 and 90, but it's a little bit more of a background that will allow us to have a cleaner estimate and show what the problem is, especially when we come to these inflation costs that we've been seeing. Maybe we'll be able to show the right-of-way needs or the utility needs account for the inflation and be able to show the cost and avoid what we've been seeing on the ALCP, where we come back time and time again showing the increase. That has been happening in the region. That's not a Scottsdale thing. The entire region has seen the inflation based on the construction costs, but we're trying to mitigate that as much as possible when it comes to these conceptual designs. So when Prop 479 starts getting implemented into our CIP, we'll look to do these kind of preliminary designs to make sure that we look for both the right-of-way, the stormwater needs, and the utilities. We are doing this currently right now with the two biggest remaining Prop 400 ALCP projects, Scottsdale from Dixoletta to Carefree, and then Pima from Las Piedras. up to Stagecoach, where we have two design firms working at doing exactly this, finding all of those costs that could be associated with the project so they could lay it all out for us and see exactly how much it's going to cost for us to finish those projects. And so with that, any questions on what we're trying to do?
Thank you so much for that presentation. Questions, commissioners? Questions? Commissioner Koftile?
Thank you so much. Again, that was answered a lot of questions that I had, but I had a couple at the end here. So the main question that I was thinking is, or I didn't hear you say, do you, for the initial estimates, do you give a range or do you give like a solid number? It seemed like you give a solid number.
It's a solid number. And yeah, sorry.
Please go, yeah.
I was just going to say, it's done off good work. I'm not trying to diminish it in terms of we sit down with our civil engineering crew as well as our estimators, and we lay out what we're trying to do, what the scope of the project is, where it's at, what is the affected area, and what is our general knowns in that area. It's just unknowns always pop up, and we're just trying to avoid those. So they've given us good numbers, and they have done a really good job for us. This will just make their life easier as well as ours.
I guess, so the question I guess I would have on that, because like I said, I've seen the city work. I know that everybody here works as hard as they can, gives the most accurate numbers, but they tend to, or at least when I come to the city council meetings, there always seems to be an increase happening. And like you said, there are unknown things. There's things that happen that shock and all that. Is there any thought to being arranged like we think it's going to be 15 million, but given past experience, it could rise to as much as 30, or if they can work faster than expected, it might be 13 million or something like that. Has there been any talk about doing a range just so there's more of a anticipation of in the future when we know more? So
on all of our projects, we have a contingency. So that would be that range that you're talking about, where we give a fixed number, but then we have a contingency at the bottom of the project we're not hoping to spend, but it gives us that flexibility to work into that contingency. Right now, we start with a 20% contingency on projects, and then it's supposed to whittle down as we get to construction, and we have more assurity of the projects. With the inflation costs that we've seen the last 4 years, it's just not been even close to enough. As the region has seen, we've seen projects go from $23 million to $53 million with just the construction alone. So yeah, we do have that range with that contingency, and we work that in. If we increase that, it's just a matter of, it would give us more flexibility, more of a range. We would do less projects, right? Because we would be adding more contingency into one project that would give us less funding that could be approved in a fiscal year that would limit the amount of projects we could do in a year.
Okay.
So it's just a balancing act of conservative estimates versus projects that we can do.
Yeah, I think the main thing, I guess I would just, just maybe foreground that, like, this is what we think, but it could go as much as 20% more, and just make that a little more, I guess I'd be interested in seeing a little bit more of a less conservative, I guess, estimate of how much they cost. But from what you're talking about the funding, then that would mean that maybe we only propose 5 instead of 6 or 7 projects. But
well, this would be hopefully allow us to come less to council asking for budget increases, because we've put some pen to paper and know a little bit more of those unknowns. That's the goal to avoid, is to less times of standing up at this podium. It's not pleasant to be up here when you're asking for the cost increase.
sure, I appreciate you safeguarding our taxes. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? One question. So you take this to 15% design, so you have fewer unknowns that you can get the cost down a little bit closer, but you still have unknown inflation. So
Yes.
there will still be surprises potentially at the
Yep.
end of this, so.
No, absolutely. We won't have a perfect number, but my two examples hopefully show what we're trying to alleviate. We would have known about the slopes on the cap if we would have done the 15% design. They would have done the grading, they would have, not the grading, they would have done the survey, they would have shown us that. They showed us that in the 15% plan, so we would have known that at that point. So certainly not a perfect number if we go to that level, but maybe a little bit closer.
Well, I think it's very handy to give council the opportunity to keep track of these costs as they potentially go up as well.
Yes,
So, well, thank you. Thank you very much.
thanks.
Next up, Susan Conklu, pathway finding signage update.
I gotta lower this microphone quite a bit to my short height. Good evening. Get my notes ready. I have a brief update for you tonight. I'm Susan Conklu, Senior Transportation Planner, and I do have a brief update on the pathway finding signage since our last update to you all was February 15th, 2024. Some background about the wayfinding signage program on our paths. The 2008 Transportation Master Plan bicycle element recommended adding wayfinding signage for our paths as well as unpaved trails. And we received consistent feedback from the League of American Bicyclists every 4 years with our what's now called a report card when we apply for the Bicycle Friendly Community Program. Feedback to also add wayfinding signage for people. And they include recommending it on on-street routes as well for bikeways. This project began in 2011. We put together test signage that was really done in-house through intern projects as well as staff. And those were installed in 2013 along the Indian Bend Wash path from McKellips to, I believe we went all the way up to about 92nd and Shea area. And the two pictures up above show you a little bit of the scale and what those signs looked like at that time. And then we received quite a bit of feedback on what those looked like, as well as the content and just overall appearance from the Transportation Commission as well as Paths and Trails subcommittee back then. So we made a new project to hire design consultants, and this was done in 2016 utilizing Gavin and Barker that were our on-call designers, as well as JRC Design as their subconsultant that had significant signage experience on all types of paths, trails, and in many different communities. What you see in the lower photo is the mock-ups that they put together, but I wanted you to see a little bit the difference in scale between the initial pilot project as well as the mock-ups that they designed. That one was more of a little bit larger than what we ended up with, but it was kind of a more kiosk-type entry in parks, which would have been used sparingly. There was significant public outreach throughout the design. We brought multiple times to Transportation Commission, Paths and Trails Subcommittee, Parks and Recreation Commission, as well as taking those mock-ups to the public at events like Cycle the Arts, some out in the field, open houses where, find people where they already are and see what they think and get their feedback, as well as we had these on display at the One Civic Center atrium, I want to say for 6 months maybe, for anyone from the public that was in. And then we created a project website in summer of 2021, and then went back to Development Review Board for amended approval of the sign package and guidelines and designs in September 2021. And an important thing to note on the feedback that we did get, we got a lot of comments from people wanting some types of path rules, different laws included in the signage that wasn't originally included until the design was being completed, and then they added that in there. We did base that on feedback from the public as well as the most common infractions that are observed from a lot of different city staff. The project area was included from McKellips to Indian Bend Road, which is basically considered southern Scottsdale, and that would be the Indian Bend Wash Path, Pima Path, Arizona Canal Path, and Crosscut Canal Path. We did receive funding in the fiscal year 2020-2021 capital improvement program. I think that was our third attempt, so you heard in the previous presentation about when lists are submitted, and even the first year that it was submitted, I think it was a really high priority for the city manager at the time, and it still, as it goes through all the different reviews against all the other transportation requests, you can see where that sometimes takes a little bit of time. So the first phase was planned through this section, and then the designs and locations were pretty set, but we did decide to make the canals and Pima Path more of a phase 2 for implementation. And then another small change we made was, at the time, there was a Indian Bend Wash Parks Master Plan from McKellips to Thomas Road, and since we weren't quite sure how those areas would change and the impact that that would have on the path, we chose to wait to do any installation of signage through that section until there's future park improvements. And then anything to the north of Indian Bend was looked at as even farther out into the future. These are some images of the sign types, including directional signage on the left. Sometimes those would include distance to those destinations, and sometimes if you're close, it's more just directions where you're at a decision-making point. We also have, the next sign is park identification signage as you enter all the different ways to get into the parks. Up above is underpass as well as bridge signage, and then this really giant one is actually the smallest sign we have, but it's a path identification sign. That's something you would probably see somewhat frequently just so that you know you're on the city path. Within these sign types, as I said, it also includes the bridge and underpass crossings, and then important for tonight especially is the safety and policy information signage. Let me back up real quick just to go back to our original sign. So where I'm all excited there pointing up, the sign that's at the top in that photograph, we modeled that after our brown unpaved trail signage. Those have been around for a pretty long time. We tried to use the same graphics, but what you can't maybe see on that tiny image is there's a white regulatory information with black and red that says no motorized vehicles, and it cites the code. There was a lot of confusion from the public about what that means once we, in 2018, updated what can be on the paths like Class 1 and 2 electric bicycles and stand-up scooters. And we were receiving a lot of feedback over the last few years from people based on some of that conflicting information. So we were glad to have these yellow regulatory and path rules signage package with different pieces of information, and the intent was that you would probably see these pretty frequently, maybe every quarter mile or eighth of a mile along the path, maybe a different message on, back-to-back signage, and kind of just help repeat the messages of these common issues that we see between users. So the process for phase 1 included transportation and capital project management staff to coordinate together and with the contractors. That included field verification of all the locations that had already been mapped out by the designers, confirming sign types, and then the content, all the things that would go on those signs. We did, as you sometimes find out in the field, we found changes needed to be made, adjustments in things. Then we started working through the job order contract with Valley Rain Construction and their subcontractor, which is Sierra Signs and Service. They put together a submittal back to us, maybe 50 pages of every sign, what it would look like, all the specs for us to review and go through changes. And then once we did that, once they got the okay back from city staff, they began fabrication in fall 2023. And from December 2023 to January 2024, we went out all together, staff and the contractors, to mark all these locations in the field and yet again make more adjustments. Sometimes we noticed something that we had never caught before that needed a sign, and so we were sometimes creating a new location with some new content. And you kind of get into perfection when you're out there, but when you're looking at signs that could last maybe 15 years with a normal life cycle, you want to make sure you really get it right. So we learned a lot throughout this process in all of that background work that's needed before you get to this point, which is then utility marking, double checking what's out there, thinking of things like, oh, is this a path that we're planning to widen in the next few years? And then we probably need even more clearance to the side, from the sign clearance to the edge of the concrete. But they did begin installation in late January 2024. This included 200 signs on over 7 miles of path. So from Thomas Road up to Indian Bend Road, including some of the places where the path is on both sides of Hayden Road. They also removed the old signage at the same time throughout this project area, and we completed a final walkthrough together to double check, make just a few corrections. There was nothing major, but there was a few changes that needed to be made at that time. So that brings us to where we are now, which the next steps we have is to map and inventory those completed signs, including photos for our files. And then the phase 2 that we're already beginning, the next areas for signage are on Arizona Canal, Crosscut Canal, and Pima Path, south of Indian Bend Road. And to look at the remaining budget and make an additional budget request if needed under that CIP number. And then the future phases farther out, we would look at Indian Bend Wash Path and Pima Path north of Indian Bend Road. We already get requests for signs up around Horizon Park area, 96th Street, Cactus. Some of those areas, I'm sure they could use wayfinding signage now for anyone that's not as familiar with the path there. So we will prioritize those accordingly. And then we do receive citizen requests related to path user behavior as well as on-street user behavior. But a more recent follow-up request that we received from a resident involves e-bike riders on Arizona Canal Path between Camelback and Chaparral Road. It's one of the things we've been wanting to include in our signage and other messaging to the public is that even though you can ride certain motorized devices on the Indian Bend Wash Path and neighborhood paved paths, they're prohibited on canal property. That's land owned by the Bureau of Reclamation. They've given clarified guidance out to everyone in the region that that they do not allow e-bikes, stand-ups, electric or sit-down scooters. So we have new signage that you can see on the right that's a little different than what is on the Indian Bend Wash. That one says no motorized vehicles or devices on canal property, and all users yield to pedestrians. We don't want too much text because you don't want to distract people and you don't want them to ignore something, but we want to balance getting the right information out to people, especially because it's different depending on where a person is riding. So at this time, based on the feedback we've received in that part of the canal segment, we will be installing 12 signs in 7 locations. So we're really looking at, including the unpaved bank where there's trail, looking at as you enter off of streets, as well as any of the links from multifamily developments that are along there where there's a public neighborhood connection or an alley connection. And we do have preliminary approval from SRP. That's one more layer that will be involved with this next phase, including this location that's expedited. But I believe these are being fabricated now, and our next step is to go out in the field together, mark that, do the utility locations, check back with Salt River Project to make sure that these are in fact okay locations, because they're a utility. They definitely need to have clearance for their large trucks. And then, we anticipate installation for these this spring ahead of the other sections of canals in the city. Those will probably happen later this summer. Additional efforts that are existing or underway that we communicate out whenever we receive requests from people like the resident along Arizona Canal is that the Scottsdale Transportation Safety Plan has kicked off, or we'll be working with the public on that. We always give information about what our current regulations are. They have not changed since 2018, but we always want to make sure people know where you can find that information on the website and what that involves. We talk about on-street bikeway improvements, since a lot of the concerns we hear about from the public are related to the speed of a device. It's not always what the device is, but a lot of times those are connected. So we mentioned how on-street bike improvements connected to the off-street system are crucial, because you have people that do want to ride faster. They feel comfortable riding faster, but they would probably be better off using that on-street network compared to a path where you have all different ages, abilities, ducks, dogs, everything. Disc golf players, sometimes people are standing around on the path in busy areas, and that just doesn't make sense for those speeds. And then other ongoing outreach, we have a two-sided brochure that'll be delivered to bike shops and community centers with e-bike information that Christina Linko, our public information officer, led that effort to get those completed. And that will help also with any bike shops that we don't already have a relationship with, where they either rent or sell electric bicycles to the public. And there's also public engagement through our police department. We do have dialogue and conversations and meetings with them about what we're working on and what they're doing. They've done some separate outreach, especially to middle school age users and neighborhoods, and we will stay informed on what they're working on so that we're not duplicating efforts. And then we also, as planners and engineers in our department, we want to look at the usage, look at what is the rider data showing in these areas where we're hearing the most concerns, including other areas. Maybe we're not hearing about it in an area where it's still occurring, but what we'd like to see is how frequent are people riding an e-bike? Usually it's somewhat easy to spot an e-bike based on whether they're pedaling at all, or if they're pedaling a very relaxed pace, but that bike is going very fast. It's kind of the effort related to the speed that it's going, and how many, we would like to see how many people are doing this, how frequently, and if there's any other patterns in this behavior that we can see, especially in this section of the path. And then we will continue taking feedback from the public and looking at if other signs need to be added, things adjusted, as well as social media type messaging that we're already wanting to do for the public. Any questions?
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Any questions from the commission? Vice Chair Wilcoxon.
Thank you, Chairwoman Miller, and thank you, Susan, for the presentation. It was pretty informative, as always. I had a couple of questions, though. I remember there was an effort a number of years ago within the MAG region to make sure that the signs, the wayfinding signs, were consistent from one jurisdiction to the other. And, you know, like on the Indian Bend Wash, it probably doesn't matter as much as it might on the Arizona Canal, where you go from the city of Scottsdale to the city of Phoenix and presumably beyond. Are there any efforts afoot that coordinate what the signs look like from one jurisdiction to the other?
Thank you, Chair Miller, Vice Chair Wilcoxon. I do remember that. That was their Valley Path branding and signage, which I've seen it implemented in, I know I've seen them in Mesa and parts of Phoenix. We were kind of on a parallel track back then, time-wise, so I recall saying, well, should we wait and not do what we were going to do? We decided to go ahead and move forward with Scottsdale's sign package. I want to make sure I'm understanding your question, though. Are you wanting to know if there's coordination between City of Scottsdale and looking at what our neighboring cities are doing with that Valley Pathway signage from MAG, or just within Scottsdale, or both?
No, my main question really is consistency. Just like when you go from Phoenix to Scottsdale to Tempe, street name signs are generally going to look the same. Yield, stop, left turn signs are all the same, and they're all federally regulated. I know that these are not. However, it does provide some consistency for drivers, and in this case, bicyclists or pedestrians who are on these different pathways. And I was just wondering if there was any coordination. I'm not expecting you to take them down or anything, but if there was any coordination. And it sounds like that original project that I remember has gone through. It's just that it's not adopted in Scottsdale.
Thank you. That's correct. And they were very, they did keep what's now called the Active Transportation Committee at MAG. Back then it was the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee, very involved throughout development of those sign guidelines. I believe if we were going to put more of those larger kiosk type signs that we had mocked up by our designers, we wanted to include MAG's, the logos, along with some other things like Maricopa Trail, MAG Valley Path, as well as Arizona, that statewide trail as well, and Sun Circle Trail. We just didn't go any further with the development. But I would say that the methodologies with both of the sign types and packages were quite similar. The appearance is different, but what types of signs were developed, as well as what kind of information that you're trying to put together, was quite similar, but a very different looking result, including dimensions of the signs themselves. I think theirs are a little bit smaller.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just worried about consistency.
Thank you.
The other question I had was more of a comment, and I know this because it came up in my day job. The sign height on the new signs you're going to put up, 5 foot to the bottom of the sign. You may want to consider adjusting that upward. The street signs have a range of 5 to 7 feet, and the concern there is that someone not paying attention might walk into them or bike into them, and especially since they are on pathways where people are going to be walking and biking, it might be better to push that to the upper end of the limit of about 7 feet off the ground, just to avoid someone walking into them and getting injured.
Okay, thank you. And that graphic might have been outdated, because that is one of the bigger adjustments we made in the field based on traffic engineering. I think we did go up to 7 feet with the closest edge minimum 3 feet away, but I'll double check. I think some of the very small, narrow ones might have stayed a little lower.
Yeah, I think if you can just follow what the manual on uniform traffic control devices suggest or requires for right-of-way would probably be more than fine. Thank you.
Thank you. One thing you just reminded me of too is at first I thought 7 feet. Once they were out there, I realized how much more visible they were at that higher clearance, as well as you'd have to have a really tall person on a really tall bike to get close. But I also thought it might make it harder to have people put stickers on them, but I'm sure some kids like the added challenge of trying to get up that high and tag things. So,
we have the technology now.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Miller and Vice Chair Wilcoxon, I just had a thought on the consistency of the signs. I think there is some benefit just to having different signs for Scottsdale just because of the different regulations between the different cities that apply to these trails. You know, if you see the same sign in Phoenix and then you cross over to Scottsdale and you see the same sign, but the text says something slightly different, you know, you might not really realize that, oh, now I'm not allowed to use a Class 2 e-bike or something like that. So that's just a thought I had.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners? Commissioner Kafta.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Vice Chair Wilcoxon's question about the regional signs, do you know, is Phoenix and Tempe, are they actively putting up any signs like on the Arizona Canal Path or the Crosscut Path? So we're going to put up signs to our border and then there won't be signs anymore, or are we coordinating with them so that there's so that they continue to, you know, so when we put up the signs, they'll put up the signs?
Thank you, Chair Miller, Commissioner Kaftal. I'd have to check with them. You try to stay involved in or aware of what's happening closest to Scottsdale. I know where I've seen the ones in Phoenix was a little farther away. It was up near Paradise Valley, the former Paradise Valley Mall area on some of their bikeways. We do check when there's a new project happening close to our city boundary or right up to the edge. I just don't recall what I've seen along the canal. So we'll find out.
And then I just wanted to give all of you kudos on the language for this right here. I really like the 20 mile an hour, 28 mile an hour, instead of saying class 1, class 2, class 3. Talking to people, it seems like just your average person, even people with e-bikes, don't know what kind of bike they have. And so to have just something more, rather than, you know, it's the simple language there. And then manual bike, I've never actually described them that way. I've always either used a meat bike or acoustic. So I think manual probably causes less confusion as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Acoustic bike, I will remember that. Thank you so much, Ms. Conkler.
Thank you.
And that concludes our agenda. Thank you so much for your presentations. Kyle Loughran, thank you so much for all of your support of this committee. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you so much.